Hello and welcome to the 84 Million podcast. Today we have as our guest Mr. Joel Valenzuela. He runs the Digital Cash Network where he documents crypto, blockchain, and efforts in decentralization. You can find them on X at Digital Cash Net. He's also active in business management and marketing for Dashpay. Joel is a libertarian and active in the Free State Project, I believe. He's also been living on crypto for nearly a decade and has activated many others to do the same. Joel can also be found, and this is for our visual guest under his name, at the Desert Links on X. So, Joel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you. So, thanks for sitting with me today. It's been we've been meaning to have you on the show for quite some time. I think we have an interesting story with you, and I'd like to unpack some of that today. So that's why we're here. But first, it's kind of a little curiosity on my end. I'm curious what our experience will be for our listeners or viewers, primarily the listeners. One time, Ben, a previous guest on the show, said that my voice was soothing and that I could, quote, put him to sleep, like when he's driving with his son in Norway, right? And I thought that was funny. It wasn't a diminishment at all. It was just sort of a comment that he appreciated. I guess the quality of my voice. And I know you're always crystal clear, and your voice
Mhm.
tone is on the lower side. So maybe we'll have the most soothing 84 million experience between our voice tones today for our guests, or maybe they won't be able to tell us apart. I'm curious.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'd have to make sure you have a very like soothing kind of like NPR style cadence of just like, whereas even though I have like maybe a radio voice, my cadence is very like all over the place and manic and stuff. It's not really like, there's a friend of mine, Chuck Williams, he's crypto developer and other things, and he has the perfect radio voice and cadence. It's even deeper than mine, and um, I think you should probably have him on the show for no reason other than his voice, but also he's a good guest.
You got it. I'd have to check. I'm not familiar with him immediately upon your suggestion, but I'll have to look into that. But I just thought it was funny. But you have a great show. I like your voice.
Thank you.
Wonderful stuff you're putting out. You're putting out a lot of it. Some of it we're going to discuss today, of course. Um, and maybe we'll just start by I gave you a little bit of an introduction. Feel free to add to it, and then maybe jump into your experience at ETHDAM.
Yeah. So there's a little background to how I kind of know the organizers. I've been going the second year in a row. I've been going to speak at a conference called ETHDAM, which probably will rebrand to Crypto Dam for next year to be a little bit more kind of generic. But the organizer is Eleanor Blanc, who is a longtime crypto adoption person in the Amsterdam area, who I believe she was kind of in the Bitcoin Cash camp from around the 2017 era and runs a, a meetup that for newbies where people get their first wallet, get their first little bit of crypto, all this kind of stuff for a very long time. And um, I've been to quite like as a context of my conference experiences, I've been going to conferences, whether they're political or whether they're crypto conferences, for probably like the last 22 years. So I've been to so many. There's almost never been a single year where I haven't gone to at least one. And this is one of the better conferences I've been to as far as um, first off, Amsterdam's a great city. Second, the venue is, it's small but big enough but deceptively big enough to have all whatever 600 plus guests that come there. Uh, the whole conference experience is just very nice, and the biggest part is they actually like me and want to hear what I have to say. So that's always a cherry on top, and it's it's kind of interesting because a lot of these crypto conferences uh, are very sort of headline and big money sort of based, and this one is very much dedicated to um, these principles of like why we're all here, as far as privacy and decentralization. And they have like a cypherpunk panel and all this, and it's um, the they also, despite a lot of the, okay, I guess, participant base coming from the Ethereum world, they also have some like harsh Ethereum critics giving keynotes about like the layer 2 scaling approach and things like that. And then heated debates. I had to moderate one between Justin Bonds and then Turgle from Scroll, which is one of these big L2s, and it got a little shouty, but shouty in a way where they were, friendly afterwards, just very heated on the subject. And yeah, it just, I don't know. There's a lot of really good things I could say. If anyone's in the mood to take a little trip down to Amsterdam or up to Amsterdam, depending on where you're at, uh, for next year for probably Crypto Dam, who knows? I think it's definitely worth your while. I'll be there either way.
Very good, very good. Um, there is a Litecoin summit coming up in Nashville. You may have been aware of that,
Oh
and
yeah,
you may be incumbent to come. Any plans?
yeah. I might be speaking. We'll see.
Okay, so TBD, unknown. I don't recall
Yeah,
seeing you on the roster yet, so this might be a surprise, an up and coming announcement.
it it could be. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was something yesterday we're talking about. But yeah.
Okay,
So I mean, depend on whether where this thing when this thing gets released, but it could be. It could already be there. But yeah, just add that to the list of places I'm going, and it should be a good time.
we'll be glad to have you there. Very good, very good. So I think when we first started talking, messaging, I
Hmm.
stated I sort of wanted to just give you an open mic, and I hope we can do that and sort of allow you to just speak freely. I tend to direct with questions on the show, and it seems to work out pretty good. Um, as we've had our previous shows and guests. But I hope to allow you space to maybe ruminate a little bit. But I do have some questions here as we go through. Um, I think the main thing is you living on crypto. I don't know if there was another message you have at the time, but I'd like to highlight you living on crypto as just a baseline,
Hmm.
economic function. Um, so what was the impetus for you moving to crypto only initially, and what adjustments were required to make that happen for you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I have to also preface this with a lot of times there's more people doing this today than there were back in my day. But also, even back in my day, I'm just the guy who won't shut up about it, who's running around saying all this stuff. There's a lot of random people who are like, "Oh yeah, I do that too," and it's a very it's I guess it was a little bit more intentional on my part, a little bit more like I'm going to try to do this and learn from this and show rather than just second nature for other people. And so um, I should say that like a lot of what I have done is not that exceptional. It's like it's done. It happens. So the impetus is from a very for a very long time, from an early age, I would even say. I kind of learned the history of money and how it works and how you go from barter to currency to then you have precious metals and you have banknotes that are representatives of the precious metals, and then they just got rid of the money. And that part always is like the record scratch moment of like, hang on a second, we used to have these paper representations. They're not scarce. They're not they're not sturdy. They're none of these properties of money. They represent money, but then the money's gone. So what are these? And of course, I also grew up in the north of Mexico, where I kind of right around the time and immediately after the peso crisis, where the fiat currency failed and they just made a new one. And seeing grandmother's old coins that just didn't work anymore because like, oh, those are the old ones, they broke. Here's the new ones, use these ones. And then just seeing the exchange rate of the peso to the dollar, which is about 7 pesos to the dollar growing up the whole time. I don't know what it is today, but it's in the 20s at least. And so even though the dollar hasn't done fantastic, you kind of see that. And so I always had this awareness and kind of got into the gold bugs scene sort of even before. A lot of people trace that to sort of like the Ron Paul revolution type thing, but I was kind of in that world before Ron Paul came around, to where when he was going on about that stuff, I was kind of, yeah, it's old hat. Yeah, I get it. Like I'm already there. But where it was is I'm not a very like maybe I'm not a very bright person or whatever, but I'm just like wanted to stop theorizing about this stuff and wanted to start doing. And where it seems like everyone else was talking about, well, gold standard would be great if we could get this country back to a gold standard. And there's no open proposals on how to make that happen. Just no bills going through the legislature. There's no, just some think tanks talking about how the money sucks. And I just was like, that's not good enough. So in a weird twist of fate, the person who actually got me into living on crypto was Peter Schiff, because Peter Schiff, and like, he's a little bit of a villainous character to the crypto world today, but I don't. I think that he deserves to be respected for his place in, I guess, the sound and alternative money world. He had, back when he had his bank and before all the problems he ran into, he had a gold-backed debit card set up, and I just thought that was so cool that I could just like live all on sound money. Like I don't even have dollars; I just have gold, and every time, like, I thought really that seemed really cool to me, and I was trying to get one of those, and it's like, okay, well, it's not available to U.S. citizens, which is something that crypto people are starting to get used to these days. And then that's like, okay, well, let me see if I could do it under my Mexican citizenship. And like, well, yeah, while I was figuring that out, I ended up kind of learning about Bitcoin in 2012 and started, investigated, started talking about it. And it wasn't until 2013 when I started to actually use it, because someone paid me back for a pizza with Bitcoin, which is, has some significance in the lore later on, but at the time I didn't think anything of it. And pretty soon, just that send, receive Bitcoin to anyone, you're around the dinner table or whatever, going out to eat, someone says, hey, I'll pay it. Does everyone want to send me Bitcoin? Everyone's like, sure. And this was before the Venmo era, where this was a very novel experience. And it just clicked to me that this is digital cash. It's like cash, but it's sound money, digital cash. And this is cool, and the world would be so much better off for it. And so that just sort of, where it transformed to. It wasn't, played around with it for a couple of years, and at the end of 2015, I just thought, you know what, I'm always valuing this stuff, that, oh, this is, use Bitcoin, talk about Bitcoin, all this kind of stuff. What am I doing? Just like dipping my toe in. Like, what if I just only made this? This would be awesome. So I just decided, I'm going to just not earn fiat currency from here on out. I'm going to, see if I can find. I'm going to see if I can just find people to pay me in Bitcoin, and that's all the work I'll do. I don't care what work it is, as long as they pay me in Bitcoin. And then I got a job for Cointelegraph, pretty soon, and then off to the races after that.
Okay, very good. Interesting to mention Peter Schiff. And yesterday night, I was up in Austin at an event near a university, and I was actually thinking to myself, because all the people are walking around, I'm like, I haven't been out here since I saw probably Peter Schiff on one of his talks at UCLA back in the Ron Paul era, but that was in another place at another time. But I kind of reminded myself of that, and then I think about him. I agree with you. I admire him a lot economically, just with his principles. And speaking of that debit card, did you ever? It didn't last very long, and then I believe it was with gold money. But then they had some
Mm.
relationship with gold money where he had this. I don't know if it was BitGold, because I think that's actually older. But gold money
Mm.
had a version of that where it was like a digital crypto, but it was backed by gold allegedly. It's not around
Yeah.
anymore as far as I know, but I tinkered with that for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those sorts of things. I think that I think they're always going to be a novelty, though, because
Mm-hmm.
once you have some sort of a digital enforceable scarcity of some kind, then trying to tie it to physical scarcity through some sorts of trusted setups and stuff is just not nearly as appealing.
Yeah, and it's probably a nightmare to, well, and the temptation to inflate. There's all sorts of things embedded into that, but a lot of people have done. I think PAX still does that to a degree if they're still around.
Hmm.
Um, but either way, I like Peter. I think he's been very interesting with his reception or lack thereof to Bitcoin and generally cryptocurrencies. To me, he's a little bit of a meme
Yeah.
at some points, and his son, of course, is very much interested in Bitcoin. I'm like, well, okay,
Well, his son,
so.
I haven't kept up with his son lately, but I think he divested from Bitcoin after the last cycle. I think he got out. I've
Mm.
seen his, Spencer Schiff talking about that stuff. But the
Okay.
thing about Peter Schiff is, like, you try to evaluate stuff critically.
Hmm.
Um, when I read his posts on Bitcoin and crypto, but mostly he talks about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Half to maybe even two-thirds of it, I like find myself in full agreement with the stuff that he says, and then he veers off and says some, like, maybe not that, but I think that he's become this weird boogeyman. It's weird that he's a boogeyman character because he's he's bringing up a lot of good points about, utility and scarcity and things like that. But then on the other hand, you have what would be self-described Bitcoin maximalists, even though I wouldn't use that term for them,
Hmm.
who make some good points and then they're kind of excommunicated, sort of like that John Wick. You were excommunicado, John Wick, and then everyone's all coming for him, like all the
Hmm.
assassins are chasing after him now. It's kind of the same thing. It's like there's a certain very narrow mindset that once you start saying some things, all of a sudden they come for you. So it's no it's no wonder that Peter Schiff is out of that world because he says one or two critical things. But also, I don't think that Peter Schiff is ever going to be a full-on crypto guy, just because his business depends on the opposite.
Correct.
And at some point, I think he's going to. I
I
think he
think he
might be
accepts
involved in,
Bitcoin,
yeah.
actually, or he did at one point. So, of course, he's
Yeah,
immediately probably transitioning into to fiat or gold or something. But
yeah, of course.
he's interesting. I mean, he's playing a role. I think it's an important role. Of course, he has business interests. I agree with that. But he's an interesting person, and I still think there's a lot of good, mostly good, with what he's sharing, except for his just really hard nosed anti. Never in the world will I take Bitcoin or trade or believe really in the idea of crypto. But we'll move on from that. But I appreciate those comments. And
Mhm.
you, one more thing, you said you're asking him on your show. Any responses to that yet?
Not yet. I'll get him on eventually. I did some work for him
Yeah.
back in the day, and I know people who know him. And if I really insisted, I'd probably find a way to ask him. I don't know if he'd want to be on. I don't know if he likes to be on crypto shows or if he just likes to shout at him on Twitter. But I would really like to see his perspective on things because uh, I think that he makes good points, and also I think he's wrong on some things. And I would like to give him the opportunity to be right on those things rather than like treat him like a boogeyman or just like treat him like he's speaking gospel either. I just want to be
Yeah.
like, you know what? Well, don't you see that there's this giant, huge market cap, trillions in crypto. It's a 15-year-old industry, which is not super old, but it is the fact that it's so big. It's getting, it's eclipsing a lot of things. I'm sure you have to see that this is a kind of the next evolution of money in some way, even if most of it is, there's a lot of casinos and scams and speculative this at that. And there's still like, this has to be, it's not just, oh, this is the best way of tokenizing gold. It's like, no, clearly the assets underlying these things, or the concept that you can have assets underlying these things, is very valuable in some way. I'd like to just, you know, I don't know. I'd like to give him a fair shot at a fair opinion rather than just you stupid old gold bug, have fun staying poor and all that, whatever.
Right. Right. I think that would be an important conversation. I hope it happens. So we'll be watching out for that. Moving back to kind of your experience with crypto and kind of our initial topic. I'm one surprised you're saying that more people are operating on this now. Now, maybe I shouldn't be surprised because it's come a long way and it's been around, like you said, for 1.5 decades now, at least with Bitcoin. Um, but I know some other things have been reduced. I remember talking to when I was in California, a local wonderful Japanese ice cream shop, and they were like, independently owned, wonderful ice cream. And I used to always ask them, "Hey, can you take Litecoin? Can you take Bitcoin?" And they never converted, but I tried. But at that point, they were using Square, and Square had integrations for cryptocurrency. And now then I'm like, wait, whatever happened to that? And it's like, they published announcements, and part of their argument was, um, it just didn't make sense with fees and things at the time, and just the way I guess Bitcoin was scaling or not scaling. That was the case even then. I tweeted their announcement out a few weeks or maybe months ago now, but it was interesting to actually reread the rationale because it's even worse now. But how has it changed from when you started using cryptocurrency only then until now? Describe maybe some of the differences you've seen. Some things got worse, maybe like I've described it. Other things have gotten better. Just share on those lines.
Yeah, well, following off that point you were just making, let me just hit on what's worse. Um, Definitely, and this is where I'm going to be, you know, channeling Roger Ver, hijacking Bitcoin in the back
Mm-hmm.
and all that. We're going to sounding a lot like that, but um, in the old days, it was Bitcoin, and then the alt sector was just like the it was kind of like the sideshow. It's like everyone's here for Bitcoin. All the other stuff is like, oh, that guy's a Litecoin guy. He's into that. Okay, who
Mm-hmm.
cares? And now it's like very much more front and center what cryptos people are in, and the Bitcoiners don't like people having like side projects. I should say the Bitcoin maximalists, but I do sort of maybe unfairly categorize all Bitcoiners in there because I think all Bitcoiners have not shunned the maximalists enough, so they're sort of complicit for that sort of dialogue. But that's a
Mm-hmm.
different story. Uh, so back in the day, it was easy to say, just talk to a merchant, say, do you want to take Bitcoin? And it was one thing, and Bitcoin worked to a certain degree very well on chain. Everything was nice, and it was just a very simple message and a very simple thing. Today, that's so much more difficult because, first of all, I would never in the million years try. You have to mention Bitcoin somehow. You have to have that as an option, just because it's what people hear about, and no merchant's going to be like, I'm going to take your third tier shit coin or whatever, unless you say, look, you have an army of people behind you saying, I will only spend this coin. It's a harder sell. You have to have Bitcoin, and then they have to see for themselves what people actually spend. But so that part's a little bit harder. And then, even if they do Bitcoin, okay, well, lightning's a nightmare, don't even touch that, right? Or then which coins? And then if you're in, say, St. Kitts or like the South Pacific or places like that, okay, that's going to be Bitcoin Cash is what a lot of people are going to be using. If you're in El Salvador, obviously they have like the Bitcoin law thing. That's their own thing. You go, depending on the geography, or literally you could be accepting who knows how many different random coins. And it's like Latin America, oh, you better have Tether on Tron, otherwise, what are you doing? So it just became so much more complicated for a merchant. And um, that's on the one side. And then also on that same vein, the mom and pop merchant adoption scene in crypto as a whole has significantly reduced, I think, which is crazy. Over the last, let's just say 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since 2014, 2015, 2016, there was lots of like, oh, my local barber takes Bitcoin, my local this takes Bitcoin. And those have all gone away. And largely those like physical store, those like signs of that peer-to-peer economy of just like gone. You can still see them in some communities, in some places. There's hotspots, and I feel like when there's a hotspot that starts to pop off, the actual adoption is much deeper than it ever was before. But the reality is, the point of sale merchant world for crypto is just not that good. And I should also give a special shout out to Square on this whole thing. Yeah, Square in 2014 did allow you to take Bitcoin for online purchases only. They never integrated into their physical terminals. And I remember though they're working on one, and then they removed it entirely. We have to remember, Jack Dorsey is
Mm-hmm.
the guy who owns Square or Block or whatever he wants to call it. Um, he is supposedly a big all Bitcoin guy, but then he's also selling Bitcoin hardware today. He doesn't take Bitcoin payments for it and just won't. And so there's a lot of like, is he a Fed or whatever kind of discussion. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. But the point is, um, this one of the biggest proponents of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network will not do it for his own business when he could single-handedly snap his fingers. Oh, it's not quite that easy, of course, but he could make sure that this is all accepted through his business and merchant empire, and he won't do it for either nefarious reasons or maybe very legitimate reasons where it's just like what he's trying to promote doesn't really work. And unfortunately, like I do sort of admire, I mean, I do sort of envy, I guess, the Bitcoin cashers sometimes. The narrative's super simple. It's like, that doesn't work, use this. But in the real crypto world, that's not exactly how it works. It's like, ever since Bitcoin didn't work for this kind of use case, uh, the alternative is the realistic alternative is just not easy. Like there's much better options out there, but there's none that have just that network effect or that market share that just, you know, and it's funny because so far Litecoin seems to be winning out as far as the most merchant transactions. Um, but in the mind share, I don't people don't even know this. Like I break news to them when I tell them this.
Mhm.
It's like, what? And it just who knows where that's going to go? Maybe there's going to be another thing, and it just complicates that. So that's the unfortunate part is just the peer to peer mom and pop merchant economy is just not there anymore. For largely, you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, and I like where you're going. I'm just curious. Do you think it's because of tax treatment or just confusion?
Not at all. It's because of confusion. It's because um, it was sort of an activist thing where people say, "Oh, we got Bitcoin. We want the whole world to use it. We're going to go get those Bitcoin accepted here stickers everywhere." And it's
Hmm.
like, yes, this is how we win. And when that got kind of co-opted and it became this whole store of value narrative and all this other stuff, um, there's still demand for people to have crypto, to use it, to spend it, and all this. That just became very much more quiet and like people sort of like figuring it out on their own,
Hmm.
or shilling their coin that they like somewhere else, and that kind of like dissipated. Whereas like the energy was, this is way to make money, and so people, you don't make money by spending it on your baguette or whatever. It just doesn't. That's just not how it works. So it's just the zeitgeist moved on, and I mean I think that's a giant tragedy, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's tax. Sometimes, and I think there's a component to that that's reality. I agree with what you're saying too, because there's just no. I would think most businesses want to be compliant with local and federal and all this stuff, but it's like, how do they treat it? What's the there's really no guidance. I think part of that's on purpose, and how the heck do I track all this stuff? Now, it's actually easier than ever to track it because it's all like
Hmm.
you're using Bitcoin or Litecoin without an MWeb, for example. You can even manually follow an MWeb in a ledger that you're keeping by yourself. It's plugging in, like it's all there, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, we take Litecoin at 84 million in the shop, but it is a little bit of a headache. There's probably more sophisticated software to use for this, to be honest, but I just don't do it. We do kind of simple, here's the address, send it and convert it, etc. But it's manually tracked at that point. But I mean, with the blockchain, you can just import it. So again, there are probably tools that are great for businesses that do exist. Maybe we need more of them, but that
Hmm.
shouldn't be a big case against it. But I think many people, I would think a lot of businesses that aren't aware of this environment, some of them are and are working even with the inconveniences because they believe in it, right? Others, I think,
Hmm.
just may not know and then need kind of a consultation on how to make it work and make them comfortable. And I think that's a problem. Um, and hopefully that
Yeah.
changes too. But I think
I think the
it doesn't
businesses
help to have
I
that.
think the businesses have always been in the exact same position. It's
Hmm.
just the user demand.
Okay.
And I hear that. I never used to hear users caring anything about tax reporting. And the tax reporting tools are very advanced today, especially it's just super easy if you just have a spending wallet.
Yeah.
And the fact you can write off losses on your taxes, or you can actually have more and then you can get gains and you don't have to give the whole gains to the government.
Hmm.
The fact it's an improvement over your just a small little accounting thing, and then all of a sudden you're doing better. And people, it's just like an excuse people say because they don't want the rest of it, but it's not because they don't want it. It's because the mind share has told them that this is like you just hold it and it's
Yeah.
gonna go up kind of thing.
That is a compelling transition that has happened in the history. Yeah. Hopefully we
Yeah.
change that. Um,
Yeah.
it,
So on
otherwise
the
people won't be
positive
spending it.
side,
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the positive side is, first of all, there's just a ton more awareness and capital in crypto, like orders of magnitude. And also the tools to spend and use are just night and day, way, way better today and way more prolific. And like I remember, so for example, I remember in 2013, 2014, the Apple App Store banned all crypto apps. There was no Bitcoin wallets at all. And now there's a bunch. And so that's just one little data point. But there's an innovative company that's still around called Bitwage, which lets you get your salary in Bitcoin, even if just you just are a freelancer or whatever. They give you a direct deposit to a bank account in your name, and it just comes out automatically, non-custodial in Bitcoin on the other end. This has always been around. And I'm sort of like beefing with them on Twitter whenever I can because they they only pay out in Bitcoin or Ethereum or a couple of Ethereum on the Ethereum network. Stable coins, meaning you're getting destroyed by fees. And they're like, no, we'll pay the fees going out. Yeah, but what about when I have to move it? It's just so. But then now Coinbase has a direct deposit option, and there's so many on ramps. And um, one of my favorite companies, S-CRYPT Finance, they're working on an on ramp thing as well. And so how do you get paid in crypto if your company won't pay you in it? Options are like there used to be like one, and now there's a few. Um, as far as uh, as far as ways to spend it, I remember in the early days there was a company called Gift, GYFT, that sold gift cards, and I don't know, they don't really work super well anymore. I haven't used them in a long time. Now there's at least a dozen off the top of my head services that do the same thing, but also in a much more streamlined way. Where my favorite, of course, is Bitrefill, which especially if you use something like Dash that's instant, you can just get an instant gift card. Like I go to the Home Depot, pick up some stuff for my house, go to the self checkout, and then it's like, all right, it's your total is 39.47, and I go to Bitrefill, type in 39.47, buy, turn it around, scan, I'm out. And so there's so much more depth of selection, so many more companies that do this for these kinds of go betweens. That stuff is super easy now. And then um, you also have, I remember back in the day, there was, I think it was a BitPay card at first, but then it became like the Coinbase card. There's some sort of prepaid card you could use to spend crypto. And they were always like really touch and go as far as, how do you is one going to last very long? Oh, there's issues with it, like all this kind of stuff. Now there's like dozens. You don't even all over the world. You don't need to worry about it. Just dozens of all different kinds of setups. There's even a bunch of companies now that sell digital prepaid, kind of like anonymous ones for the privacy conscious. And that used to never be a thing. Now they're all over the place. Also, you can spend any crypto you want on so many of these. So there's all that. Then there for a while were no good bill pay solutions, and then it was Europe had a few, in Australia, and the US was always really challenging with this. There was always a few Bitcoin pay your bills here, whatever companies, and they just kept on getting shut down. They just never lasted. And then Bitrefill came out with a bill pay solution for the US and El Salvador kind of at the same time. I think the El Salvador one's still up, but the U.S. one didn't last because the FTX, dominoes kind of took them out. But there, as I mentioned before, there's a company called S-CRYPT that lets you pay your mortgage, your rent, your everything, all your bills with crypto, and it works in the U.S. and it's still up and still doing better. It's one of my favorite companies to kind of facilitate that last like bit. And so all these consumer facing ways of spending are just super well trodden, super there. And it's kind of also you see a lot of difference with the living in crypto people today versus sort of my generation, because my generation had all their how to turn it to cash hacks, because that was largely like the big, you have crypto and you turn some into cash to spend it. That was largely something that had to happen in the early days, and I kind of did that a little bit myself over the years on the side. Obviously, I'd use crypto wherever I could, which is most of it, but always keep some cash. And I just haven't really done that in a couple of years now because you don't have to anymore. And so on that front, everything is just so much easier. Also on the merchant tool fronts, there's a lot more merchant solutions today. The problem is they're also disjointed as far as no one knows about them, no one uses them. I don't know where their merchants are because they don't list them publicly, because if they do, then a competitor will come around. I'm trying to stitch that whole thing together. But there's, for example, in the US, a company called Rocket Fuel, which does auto conversion and e-commerce stuff, does in-person sales, and also has a local property group uses them. So all their 30 plus apartment units or 40 apartment units can all pay their rent in crypto. They just get an email invoice and they just pay it, and there you go. And it's just super simple. So there's a lot. I think we're getting really close to a point when all this starts to kind of kick into high gear, when someone's like, you know what, we're going to just ditch fiat and get onto this stuff. But I do think that a lot of so like for the people like me who've been doing this the whole time, it's gotten a lot easier. For the average person being like, I want to, like, the mind share doesn't direct them in this direction at all. It's not nearly. It's still kind of it's an underground thing, which you thought that crypto was always underground, but now it's like an underground of an underground, and so you really have to know what you're looking for to find it.
Interesting. I'm glad to hear about those solutions you mentioned. I actually wanted to ask you about specific names, and you provided them. I know David Schwartz of the Litecoin Foundation, and he's a Litecoiner. They used to have Hedge, but unfortunately, I think they had some regulatory issues or something. I don't know all the details, but I had used that for a while as a payroll solution, and they would pay in Litecoin. It was Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. I don't remember if they had Bitcoin Cash. I think it was just those three initially, and they were around for a few years. Worked great, pretty amazing stuff. So I'm glad to hear about. I think you said it was Bitwage and Coinbase. I didn't know Coinbase had anything like that. So that's really encouraging, actually, for those who want to take their typical normal, corp whatever and convert it straight into crypto, and you don't have to be, like an entrepreneurial freelance guy to get paid in this sort of thing. I mean, you can do that too,
Mhm.
right? But
Yeah,
even
of
kind of
course.
more traditional roles can be converted. That's great. In terms of what you're using, and of course we're on a Litecoin podcast, and I know you're very friendly towards Litecoin. I imagine you use Dash primarily, and you work for Dash. I think
Hmm.
you did, and then you didn't, and now you're back with them again. So you have a good relationship there, and you believed in that project. Tell us a little bit about Dash. Is fine, and then I would like to hear your experience with Litecoin and why it's. I think it's the top two for you to use. You mentioned Litecoin. I'm assuming the other's Dash. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, from the early times when I was like learning about Bitcoin and everything, I started a website. I was going to accept crypto tips, and I was wondering which one I should use for this. And at that time, I think I picked Litecoin over Bitcoin in the early days, just because I I didn't really know better. Or I didn't really know what was going on, and but I always kind of had this idea of, the whole silver to gold argument kind of like made sense to me when I didn't really know very much about crypto. And I think that's a big part of, Litecoin success, is that branding for people who are kind of, outside of the nerd sphere, as it
Hmm.
were.
Hmm.
Um, so basically, the in like the history is like full of so much like nuance and stuff. So when I was using Bitcoin in 2015, obviously, I mean, but exclusively from 2015 onward, in mid late 2016, before the block size wars got too crazy, Bitcoin already had issues as far as transactions. And so like I would, um, as I've told a few different times, but I would like have to, I try to buy something at a shopping mall. I'll buy a gift card, and there you go. And then they start waiting for requiring confirmations because of all this uncertainty. And then I remember waiting like 2 hours, like walking around the mall waiting for it to confirm so I could go in and get my pants or whatever. And stuff like that started to pile up. Another time I was trying to get lunch, and then um, the time it took for the confirmation to get through for that, my battery died on my phone, and so I just, whoops, can't do that. Another time I was going to a coffee shop an hour away, like an hour, almost an hour drive away, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go work there for the day. And so I had a Wirex card way back in the day, and decide, oh, I'm going to load it with, I'm going to load some Bitcoin on there and go spend it. And so I loaded the thing, drove an hour, and was several hours working at this coffee shop, and it did not confirm in time for me to be able to buy lunch. And so I just had to not have lunch that day because, so there were actual problems, and it's amazing to me the amount of absolute crazy, dishonest gaslighting happening today, where people like, it was a problem for anyone actually trying to use this stuff as money in 2016. Today, it's just like, well, fees aren't that bad. They're only $1,000 a transaction or whatever. Or, oh, Lightning's working for me. And like, no, it's not. Come on, just stop lying. It's absolutely disgusting today. But back in the day, I guess it was easier to gaslight about this stuff. But the point is, at some point, I just had to realize this is not working for me. I have to do something else. And so I just went down like the market cap list of like, next down. And so is Ethereum. Ethereum wasn't really used for money stuff back in the day. And I'm really glad I didn't start building a habit to use that, because that was actually worse than Bitcoin for many years. And then I don't know, I forget what the late 2016 ranking was, but like in the top 5, 6, 7 or whatever was Dash. And at that time, which people don't, it's kind of like a ill-known, I don't know how much it's known in history. Litecoin was kind of abandoned for a period of time. So Charlie started, was it 2011 or 2012, something like that, like really early on. And then it was,
2011, yeah.
had it, yeah, and then it had its time, and then just it was sort of abandoned. Like in fact, the original Dash code base was based on Litecoin, but within a few months it got rebased off of Bitcoin because there was just no active development on Litecoin. And so because of this situation, like people, Litecoin then was kind of like headed to where Namecoin ended up being headed, just like one of those like, who cares, it's not going anywhere. And it was a few months later when Charlie Lee was the director of engineering at Coinbase, and then he kind of made this weird cryptic tweet about, oh, why don't you add it to Coinbase? And what used to be kind of a dead project got like, reinvigorated, and then sort of the rest is history after that. And I had actually argued, by the way, that after Charlie Lee sort of took off, Litecoin has become a much better project in terms of much more grassroots, much less speculative, more cool things on it, like MWeb, for example. I mean, I think that's a big thing, and that's, I'm not going to credit Charlie for that at all. I mean, I had David Burkett on my show before. He's a fantastic dude, and it's probably the most interesting thing to happen to Litecoin in its history, I would say. I mean, the SegWit stuff, the Lightning Network stuff, all that stuff is just, for me, not impressive. But that MWeb is really cool.
I think it was
So
the
I guess
biggest crypto main chain upgrade historically, period, and it was successful.
Yeah, there's just a lot of interesting ways it was done that I kind of I'm not going to say anything bad about MWeb, that's for sure. But so the point is, though, that Dash was the first one on that list I stopped to where I could feasibly use this. Bitcoin Cash was like over a year away from even existing at that point. And so that it just started there. And the sort of dirty secret in crypto is, once you use Dash, you get really spoiled by the user experience. There's just something about, it's kind of like the way when you use Litecoin and when you used to use Bitcoin, and you're just like, oh, this is so much better. It's like that, but like plus instant confirmations, where if I can just send and it's done, I don't have to worry about it. It's perfect, and that's the way money should be. That's the way it always should be. It's like those little curated Lightning Network experiences that you see people post about where I just bought my wow, so easy. And it's like, yeah, but everything else is just a disaster. Everything's on fire. Like this is not but having that experience all the time is just, I think something that needs to happen. And I'm kind of obviously consummate user of everything that works, but also I'm kind of like, I like to push everything in that direction where the crypto experience for it to work out long term, it has to be a just works experience there. And this is something I have fought with the Bitcoin Cash community about here and there. I don't tend to do it a lot because I consider that sort of friendly fire. Like we're on the same digital cash
Yeah.
bandwagon kind of thing. But just like saying, oh, we don't need instant confirmations because zero conf is good enough, or oh, the difficulty adjustment that like when there's a hash rate thing, all of a sudden you don't get blocks for hours. No, that's fine, no problem. You don't need to. And like Dash solved that in 2014, and so did Digibyte like a month earlier, I think. And you're not solving that. Why not? And then oh well, we don't care if it's insecure because of the hash rate. Over time, all Bitcoin's hash rate will just move to Bitcoin Cash or whatever. But in the meantime, one angry miner, and a lot of like people like Jack Dorsey, he owns a mining pool that has orders of magnitude more hash rate than the entirety of Bitcoin Cash, and that he could be malicious in this way, and he could wreck the project. Like you can't just have that leaping out. So apologies for the mini rant there on just like everything, but my point is like that just works experience is just just works for everything. And in these kinds of services and things, as far as integrations, it's kind of like Dash and Litecoin are the most adopted that aren't called Bitcoin, as far as I'm aware. More adopted than Lightning, by the way, because that's a separate integration. You have to, it's not exactly Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin Cash used to be like the number two, I guess, but in I guess Europe and the US, it fell out of favor for whatever reason. It's just not everywhere anymore. And Bitcoin Cash has its own band of adoption. So if I were to tell anyone, okay, travel the world or whatever, live on crypto, I would probably say for the US, you'd probably need some Dash and Litecoin, um, and for a lot of Europe as well. And then for Asia and the Caribbean and places like that, you'd probably want some Bitcoin Cash. And then you probably want uh, a common ETH L2 and Tron just in case you hit Latin America. And then you're covered. Pretty much that's like the whole world is covered at that point. But it is very strange that like global currencies like that tend to be regional.
Yeah, that is interesting. A little rabbit trailing on Dash because they've been around a while. Initially, it was privacy centric, right? Dark Cash was one of the first brandings. Is there anything privacy related in Dash now? Have they kind of returned to that? And what kind of made them? Was it regulatory that caused them to kind of go away from that? I'm just curious of that story.
Yeah,
it's an old
I'm
history.
sure at some
It's
point,
probably very dusty, but I'm curious because I've been around a
pretty
little
sure
while.
at some point this whole history will be told in a much better way.
Yeah.
But Dash had it never had a functionality, was called dark send, then changed to private send. Now that just sort of got debranded to a basic coin join thing.
Okay.
That's basically an integrated coin join. It's still, as far as I'm aware, the most advanced implementation of coin join anywhere. Like you have Samurai Wallet's got their Whirlpool stuff. You got Cash Fusion on Bitcoin Cash. Decred's got their CoinJoin Plus Plus. But it's basically a very fast, efficient CoinJoin thing that also burns. There's this problem with CoinJoin. This is like a little bit privacy into the weeds. But basically, you mix a bunch of money, you send it, and whatever change you get back is called doxic change or toxic change, depending on how you call it. And you can't touch that or it ruins your privacy. And Dash does not let you have any of that. They break it up into denominations so that it's easy. It's kind of like breaking up your cash, like you're into a bunch of different bills. So you can probably give exact change. Anything that's not exact change, you just spend all of it. So the fee is slightly variable because of the amount you might want to send, but it's usually pretty reasonable. So Dash has had this the entire time. It's being finally added into the mobile wallets kind of as we speak. And so if you want to, you can actually test it out right now on testnet. They're ironing out some of the last things. So the privacy function that Dash has had has always been there. It has been continuously improved and worked on over the years. The difference is, and this is where it's being a DAO is a very interesting feature, right? Where with other projects, it's like a VC project. It's like a company. You just like a company runs the whole thing, or with like a Bitcoin style project that just has it's just out there. There tends to be like a core team or a foundation or whatever that there might be people of influence that come and go. So Dash's founder was active from 2014 to 2017, and then he sort of just retired and went on to do his other stuff. The Dash core team is still active, but it was headed by a fellow called Ryan Taylor, who was active from I guess 2017 to 2022, and that's a lot of that big time. Now 2022 onward, there's been I guess no central figurehead. There's been the lead developer Sam Westrich, who's doing doing the Lord's work. He's doing a lot of great stuff. And then kind of, I guess, like me, I'm like the more public face these days, but there's no like this guy runs stuff or this group runs stuff. And also the work that I do used to be run by the core team as well, but isn't anymore because it's sort of decentralized out. So that whole history lesson to basically say the privacy coin thing hit hard starting in I guess 2017 or so, or 2018. I don't remember when. And it hit in a few different jurisdictions. Mostly the word privacy, I guess, has a lot more negative connotations in a lot of Asian countries. And so, Japan and Korea are the big ones, of course, that promptly delisted anything that had any inkling of that whatsoever.
Including
And
Litecoin with MWeb recently, which I
yes,
believe will be reversed, but time will tell. Continue.
yeah, but that was Korea specifically, and it was
South Korea, yeah.
yeah for the well, who knows what they North Korea is a different story and all this stuff. I'm sure they're using MWeb in North Korea, but that's a different story.
Well, they're using Litecoin in South Korea too. It's just unfortunately they're at the exchange level. It's not supported. But again, I digress.
Yeah, so most of the regulatory battle has been like Europe because kind of in Asia, a lot of the Asian countries, no. And surprisingly enough, in the US, there have been no issues, no actual legal issues behind any privacy enhancing assets. It's been more of a what I should call an SEC kind of thing, like are you security or whatever, So it's been a lot of Europe, and unfortunately, a lot of it is regulators say stuff, it's vague. Exchanges think they have to do stuff they don't have to do, but also it's like reputation. So there's a lot of exchanges that list Litecoin. I was actually talking to the guy who runs Bitvavo in the Netherlands, and we're talking about the whole listing thing, and he just had no idea that like Litecoin had a privacy function
Yeah,
that
that's
was
a
actually
shame.
relatively advanced. Well, I don't know if it's maybe you should keep it a secret because he might have to remove it, or might think he has to remove it rather. So it's because of that. The guy who used to run the core team uh, kind of approached this strategy of like, well, let's talk to them. Let's basically say, look, because you can coin join a Bitcoin, we can do the same thing. It's not really a privacy coin. What's going on? And like that sort of approach, which I reject the term privacy coin anyway. I think it's kind of like are you a security coin? Like, what are you like? Are you a usability coin? Like, I think these are just benefits that everything should have.
Yeah,
And like
baseline.
Verge got branded a privacy coin despite not having any privacy function whatsoever. I don't know how the hell that happened, but so it's all a bunch of nonsense. This approach of saying no, you got things wrong, we can actually be very compliant, et cetera, seems, in my opinion, today it looks like it failed. I don't think there were any successful relisting efforts except in um, Bittrex, I believe, but then Bittrex went defunct. So,
Yes, yes.
there you go. So that's kind of where that was. And honestly, there's also, first of all, the person, well, I'll get to that in a second, but um, also there was just a major development drain, I guess, into this evolution project that had some mismanagement and is pretty much 95 to 98% done at this point for real. And um, the person responsible for a lot of this, for both of those things, ended up getting basically voted off Love Island, as it were, voted off the island in 2022 for these kinds of things. So there's still a lot of like PTSD, I think, in the masternode community and the investor community, everything about like, oh, I, don't want to get delisted anywhere else. There's still a lot of that, but um, I'm hopeful that, and I'm actually working on behind the scenes, but we'll see what happens with that, of giving Dash's privacy functions a huge boost over the next couple of years, because um, I think that it's always been valuable. Obviously, developers had to focus on other things, but now that that's starting to come out, there's going to be a lot more bandwidth. I think that every single project needs robust privacy. It will, maybe, I don't know about this cycle, but definitely next cycle. Within 4 or 5 years, it's going to be, if you don't have robust privacy, no one in the mainstream is going to use you. You just don't matter. So that's kind of my opinion on where things are going. I've kept on using CoinJoin for many years. I also did some work for Zcash last year. I'm a huge fan of that project and what they provide. I've used Monero here and there. Um, I have the Stack wallet, which I believe is going to implement MWeb as well.
Yep.
All the stuff is, I have a Beam wallet. I use, I've played around with that. I like the Beam folks. Um, Privacy is normal, and it's not going anywhere.
Here, here. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A, but I appreciate that. I want to go on with the Litecoin thread. You maybe about 2 months ago or so, you posted a short of sorts, basically saying that Litecoin is the scaling solution for Bitcoin. I think that's an interesting concept. Obviously, they're twin cryptocurrencies, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Explain more along, or explain your rationale for that, and kind of unpack that for us too, because I think it's a really interesting point, and I think we need to consider that versus, for example, the Lightning Network narrative. So, why is
Mhm.
Litecoin, in your opinion, the actual scaling solution for Bitcoin?
It seems like that's where the market has directed it. So there's obviously, every crypto could be a scaling solution, right? But the Bitcoin Cash world has been very antagonistic towards Bitcoin, and so they seem to have completely separate spheres of adoption. There's not a lot of people who publicly admit to owning Bitcoin and using Bitcoin Cash on both sides of things, and so as such, that's one reason why I think you see like the Venn diagrams of adoption world just not really overlapping. It seems like, and I think that this was actually intentional on Charlie's side. Uh, it seems like everywhere that Bitcoin's included, there's like Litecoin hanging around too, and so it just seems like when people were trying to use Bitcoin and it was annoying or expensive or whatever, that Litecoin was the obvious solution, like right there. So there's a lot of different crypto projects being used for a lot of different things, but the Litecoin use cases seem to be right next to where the Bitcoin use cases were, and then just the market kind of shows that as far as like transaction volumes. I mean, obviously, blockchain transactions are super easy to fake these days, so that doesn't speak to anything. But then you have, Bitrefill was a heavy Lightning Network proponent and promoter, and Litecoin's always had more than Lightning transactions there. BitPay is the big one. I'd really like to dig into that at some point if they would share some data, because um, Litecoin does seem to be used more than most other coins in the Bitcoin context, but BitPay especially is massive. And I wonder what that is. Is it because it's a US thing, whereas Bitrefill is the whole world? I mean, again, it is there in Bitrefill, but it's more pronounced in BitPay. But it just seems like that's what people have used, because it's like, I got this, I can have this too, and then that works faster. And I just use this instead of that. Just very simple, instead of, well, you got to go load this channel, balance your liquidity, all this stuff, and then where can I use it? Well, most places don't accept it. And then something that was a little bit ridiculous that I saw today actually was, Jameson Lopp, the
Mhm.
his company Casa Hodl or whatever. Um, First of all, he's been kind of like the smartest, most educated, reasonable person in the Bitcoin maximalist kind of camp for a long time. Yet they excommunicated him, sort of, when his company started supporting Ethereum as well. Because let's be super clear: no company in crypto can sustain on a single cryptocurrency support, and this definitely includes Bitcoin. And maybe Strike for now, because they're sort of, you know, there's like Strike and there's like a couple other ones that are still hanging around. But usually, if a business makes the decision to be maximalist, to be one coin, I almost conclude ahead of time that business is going to fail, because based on the market as I understand it, that is not a viable strategy in 2024. Maybe in 2025, 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, maybe the ecosystem of crypto will be so huge that one sliver of that will be enough to be sustained, but that's just not the case. So Litecoin just has been there. It's been what people have used. And I think that there's I don't know how much more there is to say about it, other than just it's been there and the data is showing that it's used, which is it's definitely one of the least talked about cryptos that's used the most for payments. Usually, like the nano people, they're super loud about, oh my gosh, should you use this? And then the Bitcoin Cash people are all over the place. Sometimes you have a Dash person here or there. The Monero people are very loud. And then not a lot of people are out there being loud about how they're using Litecoin every day, but somebody is. I mean, clearly somebody is.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and it was prevented for a while from even being added to BitPay, and then it didn't take long to. I mean, we're now over 6 months of it being number one, and I don't see that, at least in relationship to Bitcoin, worsening because the fees are just absurd. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine how Bitcoin will be used more in this environment. I mean, I just can't. So it is what we like to call in our Litecoin fam, why Litecoin. He was our fifth guest or fourth guest on the show. He always likes to call it the perfect substitute. And I think that's correct. I know that there's probably some division between whether Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin or some other projects, but we like to think that's correct. And there is a kind of Charlie from the get go did, as you mentioned, set it up in a more friendly way, a different algorithm. We're here to complement rather than take everything. I mean, everything's competing to a degree, right? It's a narrative, but I think it's at least a more benign narrative, even if you are competing to a degree. It's like a honorable competition or something like this. But anyway, Litecoin story is its own, and I think it's interesting, and I think people are choosing it, whether or not there's hype, because it's not very hyped. That could
Mm-hmm.
change, but I think it's also kind of keeping us sane too, because if we go through the Bitcoin kind of pathway, there's a big ethos test, and the space changes, and it's out of your control real quick. Um, as
Absolutely.
we've seen with the Bitcoin community. I mean, Ron Paul, I would think it was the 2019 Litecoin Summit. He spoke there. He spoke again in 2022 at the Bitcoin Summit in Miami. And it seemed like no one knew who he was, which is a little bit
Yeah.
absurd. It's like this is like in our generation, like the father of sound money, and everyone's talking during his opening speech, and I'm like, who are these people? So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I'll end with that and move forward. I appreciate your response on that. Um, so maybe we'll back up and talk a little bit about principles here, and I do want to consider our time here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so one little note here, and then we'll move on to maybe some generalities about economics and maximalism and things like this. But you clearly believe these, whether it's Dash, Litecoin, Bitcoin at one point in your experience, Bitcoin Cash, other cryptocurrencies are currencies. They're monies. Okay, it's not casino tokens and NFTs and everything else. But do you have an opinion on the peripheral use cases like Litecoin ordinals, Bitcoin ordinals, runes, these other sort of things that are being built upon these chains? Do you think they're a distraction? Do you think they're healthy? Do you have no opinion? Live and let live stuff, or do you think they're dangerous, or what?
It's kind of hard to tell about the specific things. Like, I think runes are probably kind of a scam. I think BRC20 are probably a scam. Probably ordinals, sort of. The thing is, the underlying use cases are definitely there. It's like, I never got NFTs in the beginning, and then I decided to start minting them and using them myself just so I could force myself to understand them. And I do definitely get them. And they're very like prehistoric at this point. But so, for example, when people are on my show, I give them an NFT, and or if they want to be a subscriber, they can buy an NFT. And then when they come to my Discord, there's a bot that checks if they have it or not, and then they get into the super chats and all that kind of cool stuff. And if they sell it, they get kicked out immediately. And then someone else comes in. I don't need to know who that person is. I don't need to get their email address or anything like that. So as a token gating thing, I'm just experimenting to figure that out. In the future, I think that NFTs might be almost bigger than crypto itself in some ways, depending on how they're implemented. So a good friend of mine, Chris Pacia, was a lead backend developer for Open Bazaar, which is sort of the successor to the Silk Road. And it never really worked out. A lot of these decentralized marketplaces never really worked out because at some point you have a trusted thing for physical goods where you're like, okay, we can do a trustless transaction, but then what about the delivery of stuff in the real world? At some point, I think that we could have an NFT as a legal property, as a legal title to a physical item, for example, and not just that, but be inexorably imbued with it. So let's just say right now you buy a car, they give you a piece of paper, which is like the title and your name, and then they give you physical keys. And that's kind of how it works. In the future, an NFT marketplace, the title of a car is an NFT that also gets modified every single time the car gets serviced, so that there's like a little note on the title that like got this shop did this at this point, and you can't tamper with that whole thing. Kind of like the Carfax type deal, but like in a real decentralized way.
Yeah.
You can just buy the NFT, and now you own the car. That actually allows you to access the vehicle itself, and then you can use that master owner permission to then mint separate key tokens that you give to like friends and family if you want to be able to drive your car. But it's like, if you can buy and sell real physical goods in this decentralized immutable database kind of marketplace, I should say, system, I think that's a massive bit of advantage in terms of like your house title. Like, just not, you get to cut out like realtors and all those kind of middlemen and everything. There's so many different use cases for all this stuff, and it's really cool and exciting. It's very like larva stage at this point though. So I think those are very valuable. Now, the real challenge though is that's like the EVM world, in my opinion. Like, that's Solana, that's Avalanche, that's all these, that's kind of what that's for. And they seem to be doing a much better job at it. And typically, like, the fee revenues generated by all these networks is just incredibly higher than anything that's not called Bitcoin, as far as, and even Bitcoin has been largely eclipsed up until this last week in terms of like fees. Like fees generated as in revenue for the company, right? If it were a company.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is it, I do, however, think that on payment chains directly, it is sort of a distraction, because it's like no one's using these for real purposes. So they're just flooding it with crap that, you can speculate on. It's a casino. And I don't think I don't think you're getting a good product. Like, I don't think the tech is set up for that very well on these chains. Now, there's the other thing where I'm a big fan of on-chain scaling for sure. However, there's a little bit of a caveat to that, where now this is where the Bitcoin Cash and SV people cancel me and whatever. I do think that I do remember when Ethereum was getting popular and CryptoKitties came out, and then people couldn't move their money because there's a bunch of cats flying through the blockchain. And then there was another ICO that was super big, and everyone was trying to get in on that, and so that overflowed. And obviously, the Bitcoiners are getting a taste of this too, with the whole new weird scammy NFT things coming through, and now they can't move their money. Now their blading networks breaking, everything like that. I do think there's a value in segregating those use cases because I do believe mass on-chain scaling is doable in a decentralized and secure and good way. There are some trade-offs at the very upper limits, and the upper limits, those trade-offs tend to hit with heavy data usage. Like, I think you could probably keep increasing Litecoin's capacity, whether it's the through MWeb or whatever, or through the regular transparent part of things, to let a lot to get like to where PayPal's at or more, or the world. Who knows? It should be easy to retain a relatively decentralized network doing all that. It just becomes hard once you have to just process like every time someone updates their Twitter bio. Now at that point you start having to do things like have to shard the chain, where then you have parallel shards running different bits. And there's nothing wrong with sharding. It's great. You do have some sort of trade-offs where not every node owns a whole history of the blockchain now, at least not in real time. There will still be archival nodes, but it's not as many. And then it's like, okay, well, the validator set, or the, however many nodes are running this, is at any one time is not the entirety of the network. It's still like you can't just choose a shard to attack, because then it'll rotate out to a different one, and you can't. It's still harder to attack, but there's some small trade-offs you have to make at that point. So I think that it's good to segregate this via chains. I think payment chains should stay payment chains, and data chains should stay data chains. And that's kind of one interesting thing that what Dash is doing is releasing a data chain, like a side chain, for all these state transitions. For example, every time you friend someone on the Dash Evolution platform, add someone to your contact list, that's a state transition on the other chain. Every time you write some data to you update a Yelp listing on this decentralized version of Yelp that uses the Dash data platform, that's another thing there. But if, let's just say, there's a giant gold rush for people, like, oh, everyone's, like Elon says, we're going to run on Dash usernames, and all of a sudden there's just this giant flood of people trying to register usernames and stuff like that, you're still going to be able to move your money because that's a separate chain and it's separate considerations and things like that. I think that's the best idea. Maybe it's a bias, but I guess we'll see. Maybe it turns out to be terrible in a few years, and we're like, no, monolithic was the way to go. Or maybe Avalanche having like 8 million chains, whatever they got, maybe that's the way to go. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're figuring it out, but I like the idea of keeping the monies as much as I think. I mean, I'm kind of undecided on it too. And we've talked about this a lot on the show. I don't think anybody really knows, right? We're just seeing what works. But primarily, though, regardless of these, as I say, peripheral things, Litecoin, Dash, these are monies, and I think that is the primary purpose, and should always remain. That is the primary purpose. So, like for me, like when Ethereum launched, like you can transmit it person to person, right? But I never considered it like a cryptocurrency. It's in the crypto space, and I think we're just sloppy with language, and we'll evolve on that too. Like this is a crypto data, protocol. This is a cryptocurrency protocol, like you're mentioning, because I think that makes more sense. Whether you're using this decentralized super Ethereum computer, that's not really money. It's you want access to whatever platform for the reasons you're building on that platform. So anyway, we'll move on to. I wish we had longer, but I know your time's limited. So let's
got another half an hour.
Let's go this way. We may use it. World record, folks. So you're a libertarian. We established that, right? Libertarians essentially helped market crypto in its infancy. We've already talked about that too. And at least, and I've mentioned this before, I feel like most libertarians have really like left the room. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that is the case. Do you think that's a correct statement? And what do you think led to this whole, libertarians evacuating crypto?
Yeah. Well, first, I don't think it's a correct statement, but the sentiment is kind of correct in terms of the space is certainly a lot less libertarian, and there's
So we're
certainly
crowded.
and the libertarian side of things is definitely not as large of a majority anymore. Um, the thing about it's kind of been weird because a lot of the biggest libertarian postures are the Bitcoin maximalists, who are some of the most authoritarian people in the entire space, ironically as well. So that adds to confusion of the whole situation. I don't think you'd find a single Monero person, for example, who at least doesn't pretend to be a libertarian. It's just it's there. For example, uh, the space I think is still largely libertarian, and I think it kind of has to be because the prime value proposition of crypto, there's two. There's the casino, as Sergey of Bitrefill is fond of saying, the casino. So there's the casino, and then there is freedom. And so that's it. And I think that kind of encapsulates all of crypto. And then of course there's tech, because it's cool tech, but it's cool tech for the casino or freedom. And so the entire point of a permissionless blockchain and all the annoying hard work and difficult problems to solve to just make this actually work is so that anyone can use it at any time, anywhere. And if you don't believe in that, you're not going to build tech that does that. You might not be like a rah rah Ron Paul sound money. You don't might not be one of those people, but at some point you see a value in people in just an open network, an open system that anyone can use. It's available to the whole world and no central party controls. Even if you're like, um, even if you're, let's just say, a socialist, but you're a skeptic of centralized authority socialist. So you still want authority, but you just don't want one entity to have the whole thing, or you want um, whatever the different rationale is. You see a value in freedom, and so if you're creating freedom, on the one hand, you have to care about it, and on the other hand, the people who hate freedom are going to come after you constantly, and the government's getting in your way, and there will be things that will radicalize you, I think. So I think that as long as crypto is crypto, it's going to be a freedom system. And I also just think uh, it's always going to draw libertarians to it, or at least ones who are ideologically consistent. At least there's a lot of libertarians that don't care about crypto, and I think that's insane. Like, how can you like what are you doing? You trying to win elections? Like, how's that working for you? Like, there's nothing else that's going on that's exciting. There's a lot actually that's going on that's exciting for freedom in the world. I think like Malay and Argentina, for example. There's obviously I'm a big fan of the Free State Project because I participate in it, etc. There's a bunch of fun things happening for freedom, but I would say it's like almost like 80% of it is crypto and decentralized tech, and then the other 20% is just um, certain things that are popping up here and there, or like for example, Renato Moicano, the UFC fighter, shouting out Ludwig von Mises and his post-fight
Yeah, that's
celebration.
wild.
There's like big moments like that here and there, but also like crypto and MMA has been huge. Like, um, I think that like I helped I guess you now ESPN analyst Chael Sonnen get a Dash sponsorship back in the day, as well as Rory McDonald, and there were some others. I know Chris Cyborg used to be Pivx sponsored. There's a bunch of different. They're very deep into the crypto and libertarian sort of world, the fighting world. But basically, apart from like a few big pops like the Malay kind of moment, it's like, why are you not in crypto if you're into freedom at all?
Check, check. My mic was off.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in terms of the fights, I remember at one point we had Litecoin on the mat for a UFC fight too. So that is interesting.
Yeah, it was for a few
That blew
cards
my
at least.
mind
Yeah.
when he was talking about reading these. But he's Brazilian, right? And I know there's Mises Institute. I think has some sort of arm down in Brazil too, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. But
He's living in the US now and is very US focused. So I think that comes from somewhere else. I think that just comes from the MMA world intersecting
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the crypto world, and then that kind of bringing the philosophy of liberty along with it.
Which is fantastic. Next question would be this, and it's about economics. You can hear me okay? My mic went out.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah, it's great.
Free market economics, especially expressed by the Austrian school, has been extremely influential among libertarians, at least from what I can tell. Socially conservative libertarians, classical liberal types, anarcho-capitalists, yet the maximalists seem to draw nominally from uh, this Austrianism as well. Perhaps most notably, Seif and his Bitcoin standard and things like this. Fiat standard, his standard series. But to me, maximalism is a departure from Austrianism. And it is actually a sort of new, and you've actually used this term. It's a new monetary authoritarianism, right? Um, am I wrong? How do we reconcile these things, and can we?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a departure from Austrianism. And in fact, just the other day on the wonderful world that is X, I was chatting with a friend who posted a Karl Menger quote basically saying that store value is nonsense. And so Karl Menger was, of course, a famous Austrian economist. He's not alive anymore, to my knowledge, unless someone's found him
As far
somewhere.
as I know, he's not.
Yeah, but basically just saying that you can't have a store of value without being a robust medium of exchange first. That's sort of paraphrasing. And then I immediately then quoted a popular ex-maximalist who goes by Karl B. Menger, saying the literal opposite. And it's just like it's such a slap in the face of free market and Austrian economists and everything, especially because the whole freedom thing, you might believe that, oh, network effects of a single money or standards or whatever like that are good, but to just not believe a free market works this out is a little bit weird. Uh, it's a very sinister um, long term project, and this is one of those like I've been hopefully red pilling or white pilling everyone, whatever the whole show. But the black pill moment is Bitcoin was a crazy freedom movement. It was fantastic. A company that was well funded by, this is where I start to get into the whole like hijacking Bitcoin stuff right there. But a company that's well funded by big banks, that hired a lot of Bitcoin developers, got rid of, who in turn got rid of Satoshi's heir, Gavin Andreessen, and started an explicit campaign of which there's a lot of very well documented censorship and things like that to go against on-chain scaling. In order now has a product, a trusted bank-like product, Liquid, which for Lightning was sort of the red herring over the few years that Lightning is a real technology. I'm not saying it's not and it doesn't have real use cases, but now that Lightning is breaking under this high load, they're kind of shoveling people into Liquid, which is the main product of this company. That, I mean, you don't kind of see how that happens. Like you don't have to be a tinfoil hat wearer to see that these incentives are aligning, and in that kind of transition, um, it kind of gave way to just a lot of, if you don't have a solid argument for, we want this to be money for the world, however this scaling method is better than this scaling method, there's only so far you can go with that, until at some point you have to start saying, oh well, you just have to start confusing people with a bunch of things, like a bunch of nonsense like the Bitcoin standard, a bunch of stuff where you're saying like, oh, because of fairy dust and magic and virgin birth and all this kind of stuff, this value, and if you use it, like, I have to just confuse people with a bunch of nonsense that doesn't make sense and never has. And it starts there, and then you hit the Saylor era. And I mean, we'll just come out and say, I think Taylor's a scammer. I think he's sort of an opportunist who just thought Bitcoin was trash, and at some point is like, you know what, I can make a lot of money off of this, and has kind of done that. And if you look at the weird things he says and promotes, creating this weird prosperity cult around Bitcoin, also admittedly being an institutional person who wants to be the one by which people use Bitcoin and access it. And actually, recently, um, Matt Odell publicly criticized him for allegedly blocking ETF funds going to open source Bitcoin development, and basically is trying to keep Bitcoin from growing sustainably. And he's publicly said that he wants the dollar to succeed and he thinks the dollar should succeed, and he's a fiat maximalist. That's what he is. There's just a lot of dark stuff that's happened as a result. Thankfully, I think that a lot of the Bitcoin world has sort of, unfortunately, been very passive in over the last 10 years on this whole thing. But at least the good side of that is I don't think they bought into it. I think you have a lot of people like Vlad Kostia, of course, and then you have Ray Youssef from S-CRYPT, who's been very vocal. A lot of, then you have John Carvalho, the famous guy who got Roger to flip him the bird, who's now like, there's a big migration away from a lot of this stuff. And I have found very few Bitcoiners who like Saylor when I talk to them. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot, but hopefully we're in a migration away from this insanity. But because it is kind of, it's sort of kind of a big old psyop that eventually that people either bought into and believed, or at least tolerated, because their money kept going up. And I
Exactly.
think it's at some point the money stops going up, because at some point everyone has bought Bitcoin in the world, in that perfect scenario, I guess, or perfect from that point of view scenario. And then there's just no more people to come in and keep pushing the price up. I don't think a stagnant price Bitcoin, or a keeps up with inflation Bitcoin, can maintain that sort of a cult around it. And I think people start to ask questions, especially when things that provide a lot of real utility, that people are paying a ton of money to do things on, like, rewards points networks on some side chain of this, or like, you know, shipping manifests, or digital property marketplaces, or just, geek gaming, whatever it is. All this stuff is, a lot of people are willing to pay to use those things. And at some point that will outperform, sitting on your hoard of gold like a dragon. And at that point, we're going to start to see people start to question things they should have questioned back in 2016, like I did.
Yeah, that's interesting. We initially wanted Bitcoin to end the Fed, and now we want fiat on Bitcoin rails. I shouldn't use the terminology, but sailors mentioned things along these lines. I agree with you. Yeah, I want to go to your tweets now.
Oh God, here,
I
this is
gotta,
where you get me in
I'm
trouble.
going to go to your tweets.
Mhm.
I would love to talk about MOE versus SOV. That's a whole nother thing, but we just don't have time. Um, uh, I also just want to hear about your general experience with maximalists. And you've already alluded that you were, to a degree, a maximalist in the early days when Bitcoin was functional and was the kind of the big one. I mean, it's still the big one in terms of NGU, but functionality. We had Bitcoin; it was first. It was pretty decent experience. 2014, so you're just using that. But you've since departed from that kind of path to more functional currencies, Dash, Litecoin, etc. But anyway, let's go to your tweets. On April 9th, Michael Saylor is a fiat maxi who is actively blocking open source Bitcoin development. You mentioned that. Max
Oh, this
Kaiser
one.
is a serial scammer, literally working for the government of a dictator as its mouthpiece. Adam Beck, is CEO of a bankster company that led a mass psyop to break Bitcoin so he could sell you the cure, liquid. Jack Dorsey censored the world at the behest of the US government, runs a fiat payments empire that still doesn't take crypto, and now runs a mining pool that censors Bitcoin transactions he doesn't like. Jack Mallers is a bankster who actively deceives customers into believing they're actually using Bitcoin. Luke Dasher wants to censor the protocol, works for Dorsey, and literally eats cats. These are your heroes.
Hmm. Now, I should clarify one thing on that. As far as I know, there hasn't been permanently substantiated evidence for the cat eating. It has only been admitted that this individual, that Luke, would eat any animal, including cats, and he was raising a cat that he intended to eat, but it died before he could. So I just want to be very, accurate on this, that
Fair
he
enough.
may or may not eat cats, but definitely would if you gave him one with some buffalo sauce.
Strange. What about Mallers? The Litecoiners have
Um,
a specific experience with him because it was Charlie Lee and Jack proving Lightning, having the first transaction on Lightning on Litecoin, and yet no one ever hears this ever from him. And of course, he doesn't support Litecoin and Strike.
yeah, I know people who know him and have said certain things that I can't remember specifically enough, and it's too third party to really,
Yeah,
go into.
fair enough.
But one thing's for sure is his company is just a bank, and okay, so is Coinbase kind of. The difference is a lot of this misrepresentation. He's very he commonly misrepresents payments using his platform, or using his platform as using Litecoin and Bitcoin, and the opposite. He blurs those lines very deceptively. And one of those key ones is when, and I actually did a parody video when he did this, but of the um, when Twitter enabled tips on Lightning or something like that. And he just, yo, we're here in Chicago and we're gonna send to Salvador, all this kind of stuff. Um, so he basically said like instant cash final remittance, free, all this kind of stuff, using and based on, because of Lightning does all this stuff. And then he opens the Moon wallet, non-custodial wallet. Moon is an on-chain Bitcoin wallet that uses, I forget what the exact functionality is called. It's like a trampoline payment or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing, but basically it sends on-chain Bitcoin and then someone else loops it out and sends via Lightning to the final destination. So he paid like $4 or $5 in transaction fees to make that payment that he alluded was free. Like when you're lying to the public like that, and he didn't say, like, he just said, he talked about how free and instant and open network and all this kind of stuff this is. And then he says, I'm going to use this non-custodial wallet, never saying, oh, by the way, now we're not free anymore. This is super expensive because it's on chain and does this little trick in the back end that like it LARPs as a Lightning wallet. I mean, his entire empire has been built on dishonesty. Absolutely. And there's just nothing. I think he might be the least bad of the bunch, but in that case, it's been material misrepresentation of what Lightning is and what it does, and conflating it with his company in a very careful way where it's very hard. None of my criticisms would hold up in a court of law if I was trying to say he materially lied. However, maybe I could sue him for, not me because I'm not a damaged party anyway, but like for misrepresenting his product, even though if you go line by line, I can't think he actually lied, but he's very dishonest in the way he does. So that means he knows what he's doing. He's not mistaken. He knows exactly what he's doing. And that's a little sinister. But he's just a kid trying to make money with this fintech company thing. I don't like that he's lying about it, but the rest of the bunch are a lot worse.
Yeah, I don't think we should be lying, and I would agree with you. Coinbase is a little bit more straightforward in how it works, so we don't have any issues with that. But yeah, build, create, but speak clearly and specifically, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you actually had a quote on 420. You said we have to build the free world tomorrow with credibility based on truth and honesty, even when inconvenient. So that kind of ties into that. The other tweet I wanted to look at, which we alluded to earlier, and then we'll go into the Q&A, default privacy in crypto. This is from 322. It's coming by the end of 2029. I predict it'll be a norm. Here for it. So what's your opinion on this? We've discussed some of the challenges to privacy already over the years. Some would say we're getting worse and more authoritarian moving forward. This is suggesting the opposite. So just give us a little bit on that tweet. Maybe some optimism.
Yeah. Well, first of all, um, everyone's bank account is perfectly private except to the bank and to government, etc. No one has a transparent wallet where you can see how much money you have. You can hit over that. It's just super straightforward. People want privacy, and then encrypted communications and encrypted money. That's just, to me, it makes 100% sense why, if you're not a public like nonprofit that wants to have their entire balance out there for the whole world to see to verify it, you do want privacy. It's just super no brainer to me. Um, the challenge is it's technologically extremely challenging, or has been in the past. Um, like for example, Monero has had a bunch of user experience problems with this. For example, if I send you Monero, you have to wait 6 blocks to send it somewhere else. Otherwise, you ruin your privacy. Monero's had so many different privacy exploits over the years that they've fixed over and over again, and are finally going to a big overhaul with the Surface upgrade in like a couple of years or whenever it is. It's been just such a moving target. Probably the in CoinJoin, once it's CoinJoined, it works, but then there's a million minefields of like, if you want really high privacy, you have to like um, be careful the amounts you send and the timing of this, and also there's just like the pre-mix time you do. Then there's, you know, like MWeb, I'm sure has its own kind of things. I mean, obviously there's like the sniffer node thingy, but that's more of like an edge case kind of thing. It does take longer to sync, and there were some challenges in Mimblewimble before MWeb, such as needing to be online to receive a transaction, where I don't think MWeb has that constraint, for example.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and even then, from my understanding, if I send you an MWeb transaction out to a non-MWeb address, you'd have to wait 6 blocks before you can do anything with it. There's the little
I don't think
constraints.
so, because I've done that. I pegged out and basically used immediately. I don't think that's the case. I'd have to test it.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, it seems to be what David told me on my podcast. I have to go back and see exactly what he said.
Fair
But I guess
enough.
the
Yep.
point is, there's all these challenges, and then obviously like Zcash is the bleeding edge of privacy tech, and Zcash used to work really well, and then there was something called the sandblasting attack, where someone basically found that they could put a giant transaction with huge amounts of data for a very low fee, because of the privacy setup, that you couldn't discriminate against transaction size because that would harm privacy or whatever. And then it became really hard to sync mobile wallets for a long time. And then so basically it just bricked a ton of devices across the entire ecosystem. And that's just at very low usage levels. And so since then, they fixed a bunch of things to make that more difficult, et cetera, but also had to introduce some things like spend before sync, where usually with crypto wallets, you sync it, you're completely connected, and then you send it. Whereas in this case, if you sync it and you have your balance, you have to be able to spend it before it's fully synced. Otherwise, you'll just be waiting like 10 minutes at the coffee shop before you're doing this stuff. And it's getting better year by year. And that's the point I want to highlight, right? Is all this stuff is getting so much better. The first Zcash transaction I ever witnessed, a friend of mine bought something in a shop with a command line wallet on his laptop, and it took like 10 minutes to generate the proof. And now a mobile phone, it's not even a modern one, can do it in a few seconds. And the technology is taking leaps. When the technology gets to, like, I think we're just a couple years away from it getting smooth to where a payment chain, for example, can have every single transaction be some kind of enhanced privacy. And it works relatively well, where you can send it, it takes a couple seconds, it's fine, you receive it, your phone can handle it, like all this kind of stuff. And once that becomes a thing, like no one's going to be wanting a transparency will be an intentionality rather than privacy being an intentionality. And for example, Zcash is listed on Gemini, which is probably the most regulated exchange in the world. And when I
Mm-hmm.
asked Zuko, how did he get this done?
Yeah.
He said, I just talked to him and just said, look, banks aren't going to want this shit. Like, they're not going to want this without any privacy. Like, it's super important for a society. There's no one who doesn't want privacy, and they're like, oh, okay. And they kind of, the New York, Department of Financial Services kind of got it. Okay. And I think that people just think dark web, this and that. Okay,
Right.
whatever.
Yep.
At some point, they get moved past that and realize privacy is normal. Everyone wants privacy. You know, you don't. You have a door on your bathroom not because you're a heroin addict, but because you just want some privacy. So for very legitimate reasons, no one needs to see that. So that's kind of where we're at. I really think it's going to take off. All right, lightning round for questions.
Very
We
good.
got what,
Yeah,
7 minutes? Let's say.
that's a good statement and a good case for that. I think I'm going to actually, and I'm sorry, friends who did submit questions for Joel. I think we answered them for the most part. Why Litecoin asks, basically, how's the crypto circular economy? How's it changed since you joined the space? We've kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
Animal, he's asking about BCH's difficulty adjustment. Maybe we can touch on that in a minute if you'd like.
Didn't I already touch about that?
We've talked a bit about them. The other one would be Matsuyama Hikaru. We have, with the experience of these 15 years, what do you think the greatest contributions of the crypto ecosystem is to society? I think you sort of talked about that this whole episode. The freedom case, yeah. And then from the present forward, what trends do you think are central for the next 5 years? I think that's this privacy thing we just discussed. So I think
privacy is one. Yep. Usability is another thing. So much crypto is just like, because people want it for, gambling or NFTs or whatever, or freedom, they're putting up with so much nonsense.
Yep.
That they don't have to. It has to go through right away. We're still copying and pasting ugly addresses, or, at best connecting your MetaMask like 15 years in. We need username setups. Obviously, Dash is one of the big ones working on that, but there's a whole bunch of other things that have that. So those are the trends. All right.
Very good. Well, I appreciate those who submitted these questions. We typically have longer, but Joel's got to head out to a meeting on his end shortly, and we've been running long. But I appreciate your time, sir. I think it was extremely informative. I look forward to meeting you this summer, God willing, at the Litecoin Summit. And best wishes on your travels between that time and today. So we appreciate you for coming on. Any final words you wanted to share with our community here?
Yeah. We have the once in a lifetime opportunity that, if you told me in 2011, 2012, whatever, that a few years later I'd be able to just like not use fiat currency, I'd think you're smoking something. Like, this is crazy. What the hell? We have a crazy gift right now, and no one's using it for the most part. There's a lot of people using it, but you should start living free today. Start living on crypto today in some way, shape, or form, some capacity. Just start using it today, because this is a crazy gift that we've not had in the history of mankind. And also, there's just no way the free market develops the best tools and economies without demand. And so people think, oh, Bitcoin, this is the way things work because number go whatever. No one actually. There's a lot of people. There's so much ignorance about, for example, the Lightning Network, about how it actually works, and because no one uses it. Everyone who says they do doesn't use it, and it's like, we're never going to build and prioritize the best tools for the job unless we start using them today and just see firsthand what the problems are. I mean, part of this whole, like, I want to live on crypto because, I don't like fiat and central banking. Yes, a lot of it is because I just want to learn about crypto. And this is the only way I can actually know what it is and how it works, is to just not just play around with it, but also rely on it. Like, what are the pain points when I don't have the option of just like whipping out my, like a bank card or whatever instead. Oh, it didn't work, I'll just do this. Like, what do I have to solve? Where does it really hurt me, so I can really figure out and yell at some developer somewhere to fix it for me? So there you go. Live on crypto before it's too late.
Here. Well, we appreciate the discussion today, Joel. Best wishes to you and to all of our listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks to those who are watching also. And make sure you follow Joel at the Desert Links. Also, we are on X at 84 million. You can visit our shop at 84million.com/shop, and any purchase there will directly support this podcast and our efforts. So we'd appreciate it. And of course, you can pay with Litecoin. So, Joel, have a good one, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.